Have you ever wondered what it would look like if all of your friends, or all of the people you're playing Magic with, were playing decks that they not only didn't know how to play, but also didn't want to play? Well, welcome to game 1 of the absolute mess that is Casually Competitive's Nemesis draft. What is Nemesis draft, I hear you asking? Well, honestly, it's kind of tame. I had the guys pick a name out of the hat, and they had to pick a commander and archetype for the person they picked, and that commander had to be from the cEDH database, just so everything is at least somewhat balanced. I told the guys it was so we could get people out of their comfort zone and have them learn a little something new and yada yada yada. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I just wanted to see some people make some misplays, and I wanted to see some people get salty, and it kind of worked. This is the first of 2 games that we're releasing of this pod, and I'll be honest with you, the second game is way spicier. So if you want to see that game before anyone else, head on over to casuallycompetitive.tv and sign up for a membership to get early access to all of our videos. There's also an exclusive gameplay video of this pod, so you get a little something extra as well. If you don't want to sign up for a membership, that's perfectly fine. Game 2 of this pod will be uploaded in just a few days. You'll just have to wait a little bit longer. Anyway, let's introduce our players.
Hey, I'm Nate L. I played Zur, chosen by Nate B. And he chose it because he says I'm too nice when it comes to my plays, and he wanted me to be a little bit more rude with how I played. So I ended up choosing console Zur, and it just runs all the console lines and keeps people all out of the game and unable to play.
Hi, my name is Bill, and today I'm playing Lonis Cryptozoologist. This deck was picked for me by Adam because he knows I hate Simic, and he wants to watch me just struggle as I try to figure out how these combos work. The combo in this deck is Academy Manufacturer with Urza and Shrieking Drake to make infinite mana, draw my deck with the clues, and then win with Thassa's Oracle.
Hey everyone, my name's Nate. Today I'm playing Kodama Tymna Stax. This is a deck picked by Jordan just because he likes the deck, he thinks it's really cool. The main win con is a sack line with something like Corpse Knight to bring everyone down. That's pretty much it.
I'm Jordan. Today I'm playing Yannett. It was chosen by Bill. The way we win is with console or infinite turns with Kefnet.
Nate L begins this game by playing a Caves of Koilos and then taps it, taking a damage to cast an Imperial Seal. After he searches up the card to the top of his library, he passes the turn to Bill. Bill plays a Misty Rainforest and immediately cracks it to shock in a Breeding Pool. He then pays 2 life to cast a Gataxian Probe, targeting Jordan. Jordan reveals his hand, Bill draws his card, and then casts an Arbor Elf. With nothing left, he ships the turn off to Nate B. Nate B plays a Flooded Strand, and he also immediately cracks it to shock in a Temple Garden. He then casts a Birds of Paradise and gives the turn over to Jordan. Jordan shocks in a Hollowed Fountain and then plays everyone's favorite turn 1, Serra Ascendant. If I see one more of my friends playing this turn 1, I swear to God we will stop making videos again. Anyway, with nothing left, he passes the turn to Nate L. Nate L plays a Snow-Covered Island as his land and then taps it to cast a Mystic Remora. With nothing left, he passes the turn. Bill plays a Forest and then casts an Oko Thief of Crowns, not paying for Mystic Remora. He then activates Oko's ability to turn Serra Ascendant into a 3/3 Elk. He then passes the turn to Nate B. Nate B on his turn plays a Swamp and then does something I don't think I've seen anyone at this table ever do. He decides to not feed the Mystic Remora, and he passes the turn. Jordan on his turn plays a Windswept Heath, which he immediately cracks to shock in a Godless Shrine. He then for 2 mana casts a Talisman of Progress, not paying for Mystic Remora. He then for 1 mana casts a Ponder, again, not paying for Mystic Remora, taking a damage from his Talisman. He then goes to combat and swings his newly acquired 3/3 Elk at Nate L, and he then passes the turn. Nate L goes to his turn, pays for his Mystic Remora to keep it around, and then plays a Scalding Tarn as his land for turn, immediately paying 1 life to crack it in order to shock in a Hollowed Fountain. He then casts a Talisman of Progress and goes to pass the turn to Bill, and on his end step, Nate B casts Abrupt Decay, targeting Bill's Oko. He does not pay for Mystic Remora, so Nate L draws a card, the Oko is then destroyed, and Bill then goes to his turn. On his turn, Bill just casts his commander, Lonis Cryptozoologist, and then he passes the turn to Nate B. Nate decides to play a Snow-Covered Forest as his land, and then casts a creature of his own, Lindvala, Keeper of Silence. With nothing left, he passes to Jordan. Jordan on his turn decides out of the goodness of his heart to keep that fish well fed, so for 0 mana he casts a Mox Opal, not paying for Mystic Remora, but then he casts a Windfall for 3 mana, also not paying. Nate L draws on both of these, doesn't find any answers, so the Windfall resolves and everyone discards their hands and draws 8 new cards. Jordan then goes to combat and swings his 3/3 elk at Nate L, and with nothing left, he goes to pass the turn and discards down to hand size, discarding a Nexus of Fate, shuffling it back into his library. Nate L then goes to his turn and on his upkeep decides to pay for Remora yet again. He then plays a command tower as his land for turn and then goes to pass the turn and discards a Windswept Heath due to hand size. Bill then goes to his turn, plays an island as his land, and then for 0 mana casts a Mana Crypt, not paying for Remora, and then casts a Back to Basics, which turns out is pretty good against 2 console decks. Anyway, he then casts a Utopia Sprawl on his forest, not paying for Remora, and when it enters the battlefield, he names blue. With nothing left, he passes to Nate B. Nate on his turn draws, casts a Destiny Spinner for 2 mana, and then plays a Homeward Path as his land for turn. He follows that up by casting an Arbor Health, and then shipping the turn over to Jordan. Jordan on his turn plays a Bloodstained Mire as his land, which he immediately cracks to shock in a Watery Grave. He then for 2 mana casts an Arcane Signet, and follows that up by casting a Rhystic Study, not paying for Remora either time. He then goes to combat and again swings his 3/3 elk at Nate L, and with nothing left, passes the turn. Nate L goes to his turn, and now not having the freedom of having most of the lands available to him, decides to let the Remora die. Over the course of these 4 turns, this one Remora drew Nate 10 cards. We can all agree that feeding the fish is a bad idea. You know, it's not a bad idea. Making sure you're subscribed to Casually Competitive on YouTube with notifications turned on. And even if you're already subscribed, why not hit the video with a like if you're enjoying it and leave a comment for the algorithm. And if you really enjoy what we do, instead of feeding the fish, you could help feed our editors by checking out our website, casuallycompetitive.tv, and becoming a member where you get cool benefits like early access to our videos and bonus content. Anyway, here's a picture of my dog to ease the pain of having to listen to that ad, and let's get back to the game. Nate then plays a Sea of Clouds as his land for turn, and then for 3 mana casts his commander, Zur the Enchanter. He takes 1 damage from the Caves of Koilos and doesn't pay for the Rhystic Study trigger, letting Jordan draw. He then casts a Ponder for 1 mana, again, not paying for Rhystic Study, and he then goes to pass the turn and discards 4 cards due to hand size. Bill goes to his turn, loses his Mana Crypt trigger in his upkeep, and then plays a Forest as his land for turn. For 1 mana, he casts a Wild Growth targeting his island, paying for Rhystic Study, floating a colorless in the process. He then casts a Neo form targeting his Arbor Elf, paying for the Rhystic Study with his other floating colorless to get a Phantasmal Image to the battlefield. When it enters the battlefield, he copies Nate L's Zur the Enchanter, and he also gets a clue from his commander. With nothing left, he passes the turn to Nate B. Nate on his turn casts Tymna the Weaver for 3 mana, not paying for Rhystic Study, and he then goes to combat and swings 2 damage at Jordan. Jordan takes the damage, and in his second main phase, Nate B pays 1 life to draw 1 card from the Tymna trigger, and he then shocks in an Overgrown Tomb. He finishes his turn by casting a Priest of Titania, paying for Rhystic Study, and then he passes the turn to Jordan. Jordan plays an Otawara, the Soaring City as his land, and then for 4 mana casts God Eternal Kefnet. With nothing left, he ships the turn to Nate L. Nate plays a Forbidden Orchard as his land and then goes to combat and swings his commander, Zur, at Bill. On attack, Zur triggers and Nate grabs a Grasp of Fate to the battlefield. When it enters, he decides to exile Back to Basics, Priest of Titania, and Kefnet. Bill safely blocks Zur, and in Nate's second main phase, he casts an Esper Sentinel. He does not pay for Mystic Remora, and he gives the Spirit to Jordan with Forbidden Orchard. With nothing left, he goes to pass the turn to Bill, and on his end step, Bill sacrifices a clue to draw a card. Bill on his turn loses his Mana Crypt trigger and then plays a Forest as his land for turn. He then swings his own Zur at Nate L, and on attack, this Zur gets an Earthcraft to Bill's battlefield. Nate L takes the 1 damage, and Bill then plays a Rhystic Study of his own in his second main phase. He does not pay for Jordan's Rhystic Study, but he does pay for Nate L's Esper Sentinel. With nothing left, he gives the turn to Nate B. Nate B begins his turn by casting one of his partner commanders, Kodama of the East Tree. He does not pay for any of the triggers, so pretty much everyone at the table except for Nate B draws, and he then plays an Arid Mesa as his land. When the land enters the battlefield, Kodama triggers and he puts a Phyrexian Tower onto the battlefield. Nate B then cracks his Arid Mesa to shock in a Godless Shrine, and he then goes to combat, swinging 3 damage at Jordan, 2 at Bill, and 2 at Nate L. From these attacks, he gains 2 life, and in his second main phase, he loses 3 life to draw 3 cards. He then activates his Phyrexian Tower to sacrifice his Arbor Elf for mana in order to help cast Draenith Magistrate. Kodama triggers when this enters the battlefield, and Nate B puts a Sylvan Library onto the battlefield. He then finishes his turn by casting a Cathar Commando, and from the Kodama trigger puts a Yavimaya Cradle of the Growth onto the battlefield, and he then goes to pass the turn to Jordan, and on his end step, Bill attempts to undo that turn completely by overloading a Cyclonic Rift. He does not pay any of his taxes, so Nate L and Jordan both draw, and in response to the Cyclonic Rift, Jordan casts a Force of Will, paying 1 life and exiling Spellseeker in order to not pay the mana cost. He pays for Bill's Rhystic Study, but does not pay for Nate L's Esper Sentinel. In response to this Force of Will, Bill casts his own Force of Will, exiling Preordain and paying 1 life as the additional cost, not paying for Jordan's Rhystic Study. When priority gets passed to him, Nate B decides to pay 1 mana and activate his Cathar Commando to destroy Bill's Rhystic Study, attempting to stop maybe some of the possible card draw. If that resolves, Bill's Rhystic Study is destroyed, and then still in response to Bill's Force of Will, Nate L casts his own Force of Will, pitching Limdwell's Vault and paying 1 life to pay the mana cost, targeting the Cyclonic Rift. He does not pay for Jordan's Rhystic Study, so Jordan draws, and this Force of Will finally resolves, countering the overloaded Cyclonic Rift. With nothing left to do on this end step, Jordan finally goes to his turn, plays an Arid Mesa as his land, and then for 2 mana, to everyone's surprise, casts the Tainted Pact. He does not pay for Esper Sentinel, so Nate L draws. The Tainted Pact then resolves, and he basically tutors up Thassa's Oracle to his hand, exiling a handful of cards. He then decides that, yeah, it's a good time to get everyone to start hating us again on our second video back, and proceeds to win by casting Thassa's Oracle, and as that ETB is on the stack, casting Demonic Consultation to exile his library. Now before you go, I'm going to make a little deal with you. Since this game ended with Demonic Consultation, we will release our warm-up game in another video in just a few days. For context, on recording days, the first game we play is kind of a warm-up game where we keep less serious hands and are a little bit more loose with our plays, and since this game ended with a consult win, we'll release that one as another video. This one involves the consult player keeping 0 lands in his opening hand, so at least the odds are a little bit in everyone else's favor. So without a doubt, this game was won because people just didn't pay their taxes. But let's be honest, is it really a casually competitive game if someone doesn't draw 15 cards off of a Rhystic Study? Despite that, I do think the Cyclonic Rift play was interesting and worth at least mentioning, because Nate L actually defended Jordan in stopping the Cyclonic Rift, which ultimately led to Jordan winning, because if the Cyclonic Rift had gone off, I don't think Jordan could have won with the mana that he had available. That being said, Nate L also would have been completely disrupted, and he didn't know this at the time, but Bill had the win in hand. If Jordan didn't win on his turn, Bill was winning the game. So Bill was sending the Cyclonic Rift out just to try to stop Jordan for that turn, so he could win on his own turn. So Nate L was in a very just awkward position. There was really no winning for him, but I thought the play itself was interesting, and I thought it deserved a little discussion. With that being said, that is all we have for this video. Game 2 will be out in just a few days, so hopefully you're looking forward for that. That's all we have for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I am Joseph. This is Casually Competitive. We will see you next time.